The howling wind was the only sound Beatrice O'Malley could hear as she huddled deeper into her threadbare coat, her teeth chattering so violently she feared they might break. December 1873 had brought the harshest winter California's mountain passes had seen in decades, and here she was, abandoned on the outskirts of Pinecrest Valley with nothing but a small carpetbag and shattered dreams. Beatrice had spent every last penny. She had to travel west from Boston as a mail-order bride, responding to an advertisement placed by a man named Theodore Wilson, who described himself as a successful rancher seeking a proper wife. The stagecoach driver had dropped her at this desolate crossroads with instructions that Mr. Wilson would meet her here. That had been hours ago, as the sun was beginning to set. Now darkness had fallen completely, along with the temperature, and the snowfall had intensified to a relentless assault. "He isn't coming," she whispered to herself, the painful truth finally sinking in. Either the man had changed his mind or, worse, had never intended to collect her at all. Either way, Beatrice knew she wouldn't survive the night in these conditions. With fingers numbed by cold, she attempted to rearrange her shawl over her bonnet, but the wind tore it from her grasp, sending it dancing away into the darkness. Tears froze on her cheeks as she sank to her knees in the deepening snow, exhaustion overwhelming her. "Please," she prayed, though she wasn't sure anyone could hear her over the roaring storm. "I don't want to die alone." As consciousness began to slip away, Beatrice thought she saw movement in the distance, a lantern, perhaps, bobbing through the whiteness. But it was likely just her mind playing tricks as the cold claimed her. Her eyes fluttered closed as darkness enveloped her. "Hey, hey there." The voice seemed to come from far away. Good Lord Almighty, what in tarnation? The sensation of strong arms lifting her from the snow barely registered in Beatrice's frozen mind. She felt herself being cradled against something solid and warm, heard the snort of a horse, and then nothing more as the cold finally pulled her under completely. Warmth. That was the first sensation that returned to Beatrice's consciousness. Warmth, and the crackling sound of a fire. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy as she struggled to open them, but eventually she managed to focus on a rough-hewn timber ceiling above her. "Well now, look who's decided to rejoin the living." The deep voice startled her, and Beatrice turned her head to find its source. A man sat in a chair beside what she now realized was a bed she was lying in, wrapped in several thick quilts. He was tall, even seated, with broad shoulders and a face that might have been handsome if not for the stern expression it wore. Dark hair fell across his forehead and a few days' growth of beard shadowed his jaw. "Who?" Her voice came out as a croak, her throat painfully dry. The man leaned forward, picking up a cup from a small table beside the bed. "Here, drink this first, then we'll get to talking." Beatrice tried to sit up, but found her limbs uncooperative. The man slipped an arm behind her shoulders, supporting her as he held the cup to her lips. The water was cool and felt like heaven against her parched throat. "Thank you," she managed after several sips. "Name's Henry Forrester," he said, settling her back against the pillows. "Found you half buried in snow up on Coyote Pass last night. Another hour out there, and I'd have been digging a grave come spring thaw." Memories flooded back the stagecoach, the endless waiting, the realization of betrayal, and then the cold. So much cold. "Beatrice," she offered weakly. "Beatrice O'Malley." "Well, Miss O'Malley, you want to tell me what in God's name you were doing out in that blizzard all by your lonesome?" Shame colored her cheeks as she explained about answering the advertisement, about selling nearly everything she owned to pay for passage west, about Theodore Wilson who had never appeared. Henry Forrester's expression darkened as she spoke. "Theodore Wilson, you say? From Pinecrest Valley. Beatrice nodded. There's no Theodore Wilson in these parts that I know of, and I've been ranching here for 8 years now. His eyes narrowed. Sounds like you got took by one of them marriage swindlers. They place ads, collect money from women looking to come west, then disappear. Fresh tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. How could she have been so naive, so desperate? But what choice had she had after her parents' death left her with nothing but debts and a tarnished family name? What will happen to me now? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Henry Forrester stood abruptly, moving to stoke the fire. His back to her, he said, "Well, nearest town with a proper boarding house is 2 days' ride in good weather. With this storm, could be a week or more before the pass clears enough to travel." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Until then, I reckon you're stuck here with me." Beatrice faltered. "I have no money to pay for lodging, Mr. Forrester. I spent everything I had getting here." Something shifted in his expression then, a hardness giving way to something else she couldn't quite name. "Truth is, Miss O'Malley, I could use a wife." Beatrice's mouth fell open in shock at his blunt statement. "I've got 300 acres, 40 head of cattle, and a house that needs a woman's touch," he continued matter-of-factly. "Been meaning to send for a bride myself, but never got around to it. And now here you are, delivered right to my doorstep." "Mr. Forrester," Beatrice began, indignation momentarily overriding her precarious situation, "I am not some package to be claimed." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, you certainly are not. But you are a woman without prospects in a territory that's mighty unforgiving to those without means." His voice softened slightly. "I'm offering you a roof over your head, food in your belly, and my name. It's a fair deal, given the circumstances. You're suggesting we marry, but we're strangers." "Most mail-order matches start out that way," he pointed out reasonably. "At least with me. What you see is what you get. No false advertisements." Beatrice struggled to process what he was proposing. Marriage to this stranger, this gruff, forward man who had, admittedly, saved her life. Was this merely jumping from one desperate situation to another? As if reading her thoughts, Henry added, "I'm not asking for an answer this minute. You need time to heal up, and we need time to get to know each other some. But I want you to consider it. You're my wife now, as far as anyone around here needs to know saves your reputation and gives you time to decide if you want to make it official." "That's very practical of you," Beatrice managed, unsure whether to be offended or grateful for his pragmatism. "I'm a practical man, Miss O'Malley." He moved toward the door. "Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger." After he left, Beatrice lay awake for a long while, listening to the sound of the wind battering the cabin and contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west seeking a husband, and found herself claimed by a man she'd never met, in circumstances she could never have imagined. Yet as sleep began to claim her once more, she couldn't help but think that Henry Forrester, for all his bluntness, seemed a far more honest prospect than the fictional Theodore Wilson had ever been. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep and wakefulness for Beatrice. The frostbite on her fingers and toes required careful tending, and a deep cough had settled in her chest from her exposure to the elements. Henry proved to be a surprisingly attentive nurse, changing her bandages with gentle hands that belied their weathered appearance and brewing herbal teas that helped ease her breathing. On the 4th day, Beatrice finally felt strong enough to leave the bed. Henry had left her alone in the cabin while he went to tend to his livestock, giving her an opportunity to explore her surroundings. The cabin was larger than she had initially thought. A main room with a stone fireplace served as both kitchen and living area, with the bedroom she occupied extending off one side, and what appeared to be Henry's room off the other. Everything was neat but utilitarian, with few personal touches beyond a bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes and a small framed daguerreotype on the mantel. Wrapping one of the quilts around her shoulders, Beatrice made her way to the fireplace to examine the picture more closely. It showed a younger Henry standing beside a woman with kind eyes and an older man with Henry's same stern jawline his parents, she presumed. "My mother died 6 years ago," Henry's voice came from behind her, startling Beatrice so badly she nearly dropped the frame. "Consumption." "Father followed a year later. Heart just gave out, some say from grief, though he wasn't the type to admit to such things." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said, carefully returning the photograph to its place. "I lost my parents recently as well. It's difficult." "That it is," Henry agreed, hanging his coat on a peg by the door and stamping snow from his boots. "Should you be up and about?" "I was going stir-crazy lying in that bed another minute," she admitted. "Besides, I've imposed upon your hospitality long enough without contributing anything." Henry's eyebrows rose. "You've been at death's door, Miss O'Malley. Nobody expects contributions from the nearly dead." Despite herself, Beatrice laughed. "Well, I'm firmly among the living now, Mr. Forrester, and I was raised to earn my keep." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Can you cook?" "I can," she replied, drawing herself up with a hint of pride. "Quite well, in fact." "Then I surrender my kitchen to you, though I should warn you the provisions are basic. Spring supply wagons won't make it through until the pass is clear." For the first time since her arrival, Beatrice felt a sense of purpose. "Basic is fine. I can work with basic." While Henry went to clean up from his morning chores, Beatrice took inventory of the kitchen stores. She found flour, salt, sugar, coffee beans, dried beans, smoked meat, and some root vegetables stored in a cool corner. It wasn't much, but she could certainly prepare something more appealing than whatever Henry had been sustaining himself on. By the time he returned, she had a pot of bean soup simmering over the fire and a batch of biscuits baking in the cast-iron oven. "Smells like heaven," Henry commented, eyeing the food with undisguised appreciation. "Been living on coffee and jerky more days than not." "That explains why you're so thin," Beatrice observed before she could stop herself. Henry looked startled for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his features entirely, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his eyes that caught Beatrice off guard. "Not all of us had the benefit of Boston cooking, Miss O'Malley." "Beatrice," she corrected him impulsively. "If I'm to be your wife in the eyes of others, perhaps you should use my given name." Something flickered in his expression. "Beatrice," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "And you should call me Henry then." The meal that followed was the most comfortable interaction they'd had thus far. Henry told her about his ranch, modest by California standards, but with good grazing land and a reliable spring. He spoke with obvious pride about the bloodlines of his cattle and his plans to expand once he'd saved enough to purchase the adjacent property. "And what about you?" he asked as they lingered over coffee. "What drove a Boston lady to seek marriage clear across the country?" Beatrice stared into her cup, weighing how much to reveal. "My father was a businessman, textiles primarily. He made some poor investments before he died, left my mother and me with considerable debts. When mother passed 6 months later, creditors took everything." "Everything?" Henry prompted gently when she fell silent. "The house, the furnishings, even my mother's jewelry," Beatrice confirmed, the old pain still sharp. "I had an aunt who offered to take me in, but her husband made it clear I would be expected to work as an unpaid servant in return for their charity." She looked up then, meeting Henry's gaze directly. I decided I would rather take my chances with a stranger who at least offered marriage than live as a glorified slave to relatives who resented my very existence. Henry nodded slowly. Sounds like you made the sensible choice, even if it didn't work out as planned. Did I? Beatrice asked with a bitter laugh. I'm still at the mercy of a stranger's charity. Not charity, Henry corrected firmly. An arrangement. And one you're free to accept or reject once you're well enough to make your way to town. And if I reject it, she challenged. What then? Henry leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. Then I'll take you to San Diego when the pass is clear. It's a growing place, you might find work there, perhaps as a teacher or a seamstress. The fact that he had clearly thought about her potential future without him was oddly touching. And if I accept, Beatrice asked softly, then we get married proper, build this place up together, maybe have some young'uns down the line. His directness was disarming. I won't promise romance, Beatrice, but I will promise respect, fidelity, and partnership. That's more than many marriages start with. She couldn't argue with that. Many of the marriages she'd witnessed in Boston society had been loveless arrangements based on financial advantage or social climbing. I'll consider it, she said finally. Truly consider it. Henry seemed satisfied with that. That's all I ask. He rose from the table, gathering their dishes. Now you've cooked, so I'll clean up. Then I need to check on a pregnant heifer that's looking close to calving. Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get some fresh air, see something of the place. Beatrice hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, I think I would like that very much. An hour later, bundled in Henry's spare coat and a pair of his wool socks stuffed into her own inadequate boots, Beatrice stood in the barn watching in fascination as Henry gently examined the pregnant cow. She's close, he confirmed, patting the animal's flank. Probably tonight or tomorrow, first calf too, so she'll need watching. Is it dangerous? Beatrice asked, keeping a respectful distance from the enormous creature. Can be, Henry acknowledged, especially with first-timers. They don't always know what to do, and sometimes the calf isn't positioned right. Like human births, Beatrice observed, remembering stories her mother had told about difficult deliveries among their acquaintances. Henry looked at her with newfound respect. Exactly like that. You ever assist with a birth before, human or animal? She asked with a small smile. Either. I helped our cook when she delivered her baby, Beatrice admitted. Our housekeeper was supposed to fetch the doctor, but the storm was too severe and the baby came quickly. It was educational. Henry chuckled. I bet it was. Well, if you've got the stomach for it, I might need an extra pair of hands when this one decides to deliver. The idea should have horrified her, a properly raised Boston lady involving herself in something so messy and primitive. But instead, Beatrice found herself intrigued by the prospect of being useful, of participating in the raw, real cycle of life on the ranch. I would be happy to help, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They spent the remainder of the afternoon touring the ranch. Despite the snow, Henry showed her the boundaries of his property, the creek that provided water year-round, the small orchard of apple and pear trees, and the spot where he hoped to build a larger house someday. This was just supposed to be a temporary cabin, he explained as they made their way back, the winter sun already setting though it was barely 4 o'clock. But then, there was always something more pressing: to spend money on more cattle, better fencing, a new plow. It's a good cabin, Beatrice assured him. Solid and warm. It's too small for a family, Henry said, giving her a sidelong glance. Before Beatrice could formulate a response to that loaded statement, a sound caught Henry's attention. He stopped abruptly, head tilted. That's Daisy lowing. Sounds like she's started labor. He quickened his pace. "You still willing to help?" Beatrice hiked up her skirts slightly to move faster through the snow. "Lead the way." What followed was one of the most exhausting, exhilarating, and educational nights of Beatrice's life. The heifer's labor progressed slowly at first, then stalled completely when Henry discovered the calf was turned wrong. "I'll have to reach in and turn it," he explained grimly, rolling up his sleeve. "Otherwise we'll lose both of them." Beatrice held the lantern steady, following Henry's terse instructions to move it this way or that as he worked with grim determination, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold of the barn. After what seemed an eternity, his face relaxed into a smile. "Got it. He's coming now. Get ready with those clean cloths." Within minutes, a wet, gangly calf slid into the world, and Beatrice found herself laughing with delight as Henry quickly cleared its nose and mouth, then began vigorously rubbing it with straw to stimulate its breathing. "Come on, little fella," he murmured. "Your mama worked too hard for you to give up now." As if in response, the calf let out a weak bleat, then a stronger one. Henry's face broke into a wide grin as he looked up at Beatrice, his eyes shining with a boyish excitement that transformed him. "We did it," Beatrice exclaimed, caught up in the moment's triumph. "We sure did," Henry agreed, still rubbing the calf as its mother began to lick it enthusiastically. "You were a natural, Beatrice. Didn't flinch once." "It was amazing," she admitted, watching in wonder as the wobbly calf made its first attempts to stand. "I've never experienced anything like it." They stayed until the calf successfully nursed for the first time, then made their way back to the cabin as dawn was breaking. Both were exhausted, splattered with substances Beatrice preferred not to identify too closely, but sharing a camaraderie that hadn't existed before. "Get some sleep," Henry suggested as they stamped snow from their boots at the cabin door. "I'll check on them again in a few hours." "Wake me when you go," Beatrice said impulsively. "I'd like to see how they're doing too." Henry studied her for a moment, something like admiration in his gaze. "You're not what I expected, Beatrice O'Malley." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Good," he said simply. "Very good." As Beatrice drifted off to sleep a short while later, it occurred to her that Henry Forrester wasn't what she had expected either. Theodore Wilson's advertisement had painted a picture of refined prosperity, a gentleman rancher seeking a cultured wife. Henry was nothing like that fictional ideal. He was rougher, plainer, more direct, but he was also real. And that, Beatrice was beginning to realize, made all the difference. The blizzard continued for another week, keeping them confined to the ranch. With each passing day, Beatrice found herself settling into a routine with Henry that felt increasingly natural. Mornings were spent on chores, Henry handling the outdoor work, while Beatrice took charge of the cabin, cooking, mending, and adding small touches that made the space feel more like a home. Afternoons often found them working together, whether checking on the new calf and its mother or repairing tack in the warmth of the cabin. Evenings were devoted to conversation, sometimes accompanied by Henry reading aloud from one of his books. He had a surprisingly diverse collection, from practical manuals on animal husbandry to volumes of poetry and classic literature. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," he explained when Beatrice commented on his library. "She believed in the power of words to transport you beyond your circumstances." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Beatrice observed, running her fingers along the spine of a well-worn copy of Wuthering Heights. "She was," Henry agreed softly. "You remind me of her sometimes, your determination, the way you don't complain even when things are difficult." The comparison touched Beatrice deeply. "I'll take that as the highest compliment." "It is," Henry confirmed, their eyes meeting across the small table. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection that had been gradually forming through their shared experiences and conversations. It was on the 10th day that the weather finally broke, the howling wind dying down to be replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Henry returned from his morning chores with an announcement that changed everything. "Pass should be clear enough to travel by tomorrow," he said, hanging up his coat. "If you still want to go to San Diego, we can leave at first light." The statement caught Beatrice off guard. She had been so absorbed in the day-to-day rhythm of life at the ranch that she'd almost forgotten there was a decision to be made. Now, faced with the reality of leaving, she found herself strangely reluctant. She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. "I need to think." Henry nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Take all the time you need. I've got fence repairs to see to, won't be back until sundown." After he left, Beatrice paced the cabin, weighing her options. San Diego represented possibility, the chance to start fresh, to make her own way. But it also meant uncertainty, the very real prospect of poverty and struggle in a city where she knew no one. Staying meant marriage to Henry, a man she was coming to respect and even enjoy, but whom she'd known for a mere fortnight. Yet it also meant security, purpose, and the chance to build something meaningful on this land that was already beginning to feel like home. As the afternoon wore on, Beatrice found herself drawn to the small desk where Henry kept the ranch's records. She hadn't pried into his papers before, but now she felt compelled to understand more about the practical realities of what she was considering. The ledgers revealed a man who was methodical and forward-thinking. Henry's financial situation wasn't lavish, but it was solid. He paid his debts on time, set aside money for improvements, and even had a small but growing savings account at a bank in San Diego. Behind the current ledger, Beatrice discovered a folded piece of paper that made her heart skip. It was a half-written advertisement for a mail-order bride, dated 3 months earlier but apparently never sent. Rancher, 30, seeks woman of good character for marriage. Offer home, respect, and partnership. Property growing, prospects good. Prefer practical nature over social refinements. He hadn't been lying when he said he'd considered seeking a bride. The discovery made Beatrice smile. It was so like Henry to focus on practicality rather than romance in his advertisement. By the time she heard the sound of hoofbeats announcing Henry's return, Beatrice had made her decision. She met him at the door, taking his coat and hanging it on the peg in a gesture that felt domestic and right. "I've been thinking," she began as he warmed his hands by the fire. And he turned to face her, his expression guarded but hopeful. "I'd like to stay," Beatrice said simply. "If your offer still stands." The smile that broke across Henry's face was like sunrise after the long storm, warm, bright, and full of promise. "It stands," he confirmed. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a catch by Boston standards." "I left Boston standards behind when I boarded that stagecoach," Beatrice replied with a smile of her own. "And you, Henry Forrester, are a far better man than you give yourself credit for." He crossed the room in 2 long strides, taking her hands in his. They were rough and calloused but gentle as they enveloped hers. "I can't promise it will be easy, Beatrice. Ranch life is hard, especially for a woman used to city comforts." "I'm stronger than I look," she assured him, "and I'm a quick learner." Henry's eyes searched hers, as if making sure she truly understood what she was agreeing to. "There's something else you should know before you decide for certain." "What's that?" "I'm already half in love with you," he admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "Started the night you helped deliver that calf without so much as a whimper of complaint, despite being barely recovered yourself. Knew for sure when I saw you this morning." hair all mussed from sleep, telling that new calf a story like he could understand every word. Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks, but she didn't look away from his intense gaze. "That's good," she said softly, "because I think I might be half in love with you too." "Only half," Henry teased, a hint of vulnerability beneath the jest. "Well," Beatrice replied with newfound boldness, "I suspect the other half will follow quickly enough." Then Henry was pulling her gently into his arms, and their first kiss was everything Beatrice hadn't known to hope for, tender yet passionate. An unspoken promise of the partnership they were choosing to build together. 2 days later, they made the journey to Pinecrest Valley, where the local minister married them in a simple ceremony with Henry's nearest neighbors as witnesses. Beatrice wore her best dress, the only one that had survived her journey west, with wildflowers Henry had somehow found poking through the snow as her bouquet. "Not exactly the wedding a Boston lady might have dreamed of," Henry whispered as they signed the marriage certificate. "It's perfect," Beatrice assured him, and she meant it. The grand weddings she'd attended in Boston had often been devoid of the genuine affection she felt radiating from Henry's eyes when he looked at her. That night, as they returned to the ranch that was now truly their home, Beatrice reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. If Theodore Wilson had been real, if he had met her at that crossroads as promised, she would never have known Henry Forrester existed. The thought made her shiver. "Cold?" Henry asked, immediately draping his arm around her shoulders as they sat before the fire. "No," Beatrice replied, leaning into his warmth. "Just thinking about how sometimes what seems like the worst moment of your life can lead to the best." Henry nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Life's funny that way. As winter gave way to spring, Beatrice threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She discovered a natural affinity for gardening, expanding the small vegetable plot behind the cabin, and adding herbs and flowers that brought color and fragrance to their home. Henry proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to milk the cow they purchased with money from her first butter sales at the general store, how to recognize when the chickens were laying eggs in hidden spots rather than the coop, and how to predict weather changes by watching the behavior of the wildlife. Their relationship deepened as they worked side by side, falling into a rhythm of partnership that felt as natural as breathing. Henry's initial gruffness gradually gave way to an easy affection that manifested in 100 small ways: a hand at the small of her back as they walked together, wildflowers picked during his rounds of the property, the way he'd draw her into an impromptu dance when she hummed while cooking. By the time summer arrived in a blaze of golden sunlight and wildflowers, Beatrice couldn't imagine any life but the one they were building together. Her hands had grown calloused, her skin had tanned from hours in the garden, and her wardrobe now consisted mostly of practical cotton dresses suitable for ranch work. But she had never felt more alive, more purposeful, or more loved. It was on a warm July evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink, that Beatrice decided to share the news she'd been harboring for nearly 2 weeks. "Henry," she began, her voice soft with emotion, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "Everything all right, B?" The nickname had emerged naturally months ago, and she loved the way it sounded in his deep voice. "More than all right," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Henry went completely still, his eyes widening as he processed her words. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled the nearby chickens, he lifted her from her chair and spun her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A baby," he repeated, wonder filling his voice. Our baby. Due around February, I think, Beatrice confirmed, laughing at his exuberance. Henry's expression suddenly grew serious. February means winter, bad weather. We should think about getting you to San Diego before then. Make sure there's a doctor nearby when your time comes. Beatrice shook her head firmly. This baby will be born right here, on the land his father works and his mother loves. We'll prepare everything we need, and Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring ranch said she's helped deliver dozens of babies. You're sure? Henry asked, concern evident in his eyes. I'm sure, Beatrice confirmed. This is our home, Henry. Where else would I want our child to be born? The months that followed were filled with preparations. Henry threw himself into expanding the cabin, adding a proper nursery adjoining their bedroom. Beatrice sewed baby clothes from fabrics purchased on their infrequent trips to town, and knitted tiny blankets during the quiet evenings as autumn turned the landscape to gold and crimson. Word spread through the small community about the coming Forrester baby, and neighbors began to appear with gifts and offers of help: handmade cradles, preserved fruits for the winter pantry, promises to check in regularly once the snow began to fall. I never realized how many friends we had, Beatrice commented one evening as they unpacked yet another basket of baby items left by a neighboring rancher's wife. People out here look after each other, Henry explained. It's the only way to survive. He paused, running his hand over the tiny quilt they just unwrapped. Though I suspect you've made more friends in 6 months than I managed in 8 years. It was true that Beatrice had a gift for connecting with people. Her natural warmth and genuine interest in others had quickly endeared her to the scattered families of the valley. What had started as occasional social calls had grown into regular gatherings, with the Forrester Ranch often serving as a meeting place for community discussions or impromptu celebrations. You just needed someone to draw you out of your shell, Beatrice teased, leaning over to kiss his cheek. Henry caught her hand, his expression suddenly serious. You've changed everything, Bea, not just the ranch or the house. Me. For the better, I hope, she replied softly. For the better, he confirmed, pulling her gently into his arms. I used to think all I needed was this land and enough success to prove my father wrong about moving west. Now I know better. Winter arrived early that year, with the first heavy snows falling before Thanksgiving. By December, the passes were closed once again, and Beatrice found herself remembering her first days at the ranch, how foreign and intimidating everything had seemed then, how uncertain her future had felt. Now, as she moved around their expanded cabin, 7 months pregnant and thoroughly at home, those memories seemed to belong to another person entirely. The baby, apparently sensing his mother's contentment, chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick. Settle down in there, Beatrice laughed, placing her hand over the spot. You'll have plenty of time to run wild once you arrive. Is he kicking again? Henry asked, coming in from the cold with an armload of firewood. Like he's trying to herd cattle already, Beatrice confirmed with a smile. Takes after his father. Henry set down the wood and came to place his hand beside hers, his face lighting up when he felt the movement beneath his palm. Strong boy, or girl, Beatrice reminded him. Either way, strong, Henry affirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead, just like their mother. As January turned to February, Beatrice felt a strange sense of things coming full circle. It had been just over a year since she'd left Boston, just over a year since she'd been abandoned in the snow and found by the man who was now her husband. What are you thinking about? Henry asked one evening, finding her gazing out at the snowy landscape, lost in thought. About how different things might have been, she admitted. If Theodore Wilson had been real, if he'd met me as promised. Henry came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her expanded waistline. "I've thought about that too. Can't decide if I should curse the man for leaving you to freeze or thank him for giving me the chance to find you." Beatrice leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest against her back. "I know which I'd choose." Before Henry could respond, Beatrice gasped, a sharp pain tightening across her abdomen. "B." Henry's voice sharpened with concern. "I think," she managed as the pain subsided, "our baby might be eager to celebrate the anniversary of my arrival." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain, determination, and finally, indescribable joy as their son made his entrance into the world with a lusty cry that seemed to fill the entire cabin. Mrs. Peterson, true to her word, had arrived shortly after Henry's frantic summons, bringing decades of experience and a calm demeanor that kept both new parents grounded through the difficult labor. "He's perfect," Henry whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that suddenly seemed enormous. "Look what we made, B." Exhausted but radiant, Beatrice watched her husband with their newborn son, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. What shall we call him? They had discussed names throughout her pregnancy but never settled on a final choice. Henry studied the baby's face thoughtfully. "What about William? After your father?" The suggestion brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. She had mentioned her father's name only once, months ago, yet Henry had remembered. "William Henry Forrester," she said, trying out the sound of it. "It's perfect." "Welcome to the world, William," Henry murmured to his son. "You've got quite a legacy to live up to. Your mother is the bravest, strongest woman in all of California." "I think you're biased," Beatrice laughed softly. "Doesn't mean I'm wrong," Henry countered with a grin as Mrs. Peterson took her leave, promising to return the next day to check on mother and baby. Henry settled on the bed beside Beatrice, one arm around her shoulders and the other helping to support their sleeping son. "Did you ever imagine, a year ago, that this is where you'd end up?" he asked, his voice hushed in the quiet room. "Never," Beatrice admitted. "But I wouldn't change a single moment, not even being abandoned in that blizzard." "Even though you nearly died," Henry raised an eyebrow. "Even then," she confirmed. "Because it brought me to you and to this life we've built together." Henry pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "When I found you in that snow, half frozen and barely breathing, all I could think was that I needed to save you. I had no idea you'd end up saving me right back." "Is that what I did?" Beatrice asked softly. "More than you know," Henry replied. "Before you, I was just existing, working the land, going through the motions. Now I'm living. There's a difference." As if sensing the importance of the moment, little William stirred in his sleep, one tiny hand escaping from his blanket to grasp Henry's finger with surprising strength. "He's got a good grip," Henry observed with pride. "He knows his father," Beatrice replied. "He's holding on to what matters most." That night, as her husband and son slept peacefully beside her, Beatrice found herself thinking once more of the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. The mail-order bride abandoned in the snow had found not just survival but love, family, and purpose in the arms of a cowboy who'd claimed her as his wife on a cold winter's night. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd left Boston, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have dreamed. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. William grew stronger each day, his curious eyes taking in the world around him with an intensity that reminded Beatrice of his father. The ranch flourished under their combined care, with new calves dotting the pastures and the expanded garden promising a bountiful harvest. One warm afternoon in late April, as Beatrice sat on the porch nursing William while Henry mended tack nearby, a rider appeared on the road leading to their ranch, unusual enough to draw both their attention. Expecting anyone, Beatrice asked, adjusting her shawl to cover herself and the baby. Henry shook his head, setting aside his work and standing to greet the visitor. As the rider drew closer, Beatrice could make out a well-dressed man who appeared to be in his 40s, with a prosperous look about him. "Afternoon," Henry called as the man reined in his horse. "Something I can help you with," the stranger dismounted, removing his hat respectfully when he noticed Beatrice and the baby. "I'm looking for a Miss Beatrice O'Malley. I was told in town she might be found here." Beatrice felt a chill despite the warm day. "I'm Beatrice Forrester now," she replied cautiously. "What business do you have with me?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly at her married name, but he continued smoothly. "My name is James Harrington. I'm an attorney from San Francisco." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "I've been searching for you for several months, Mrs. Forrester. It seems you've inherited a significant sum." "Inherited?" Beatrice repeated, confusion evident in her voice. "There must be some mistake. My parents left nothing but debts." "Not from your parents," Mr. Harrington clarified. "From your mother's brother, Edward O'Malley. He made his fortune in the gold fields and died without direct heirs. You're his only living relative." Henry had moved to stand protectively beside Beatrice, his expression wary. "Perhaps you'd better come inside, Mr. Harrington. Seems we have matters to discuss." Over coffee at their kitchen table, the attorney explained that Beatrice's uncle had left her not only a substantial sum of money, but also property in San Francisco, a handsome townhouse in a fashionable neighborhood, and shares in a shipping company. "He lost touch with your mother years ago after a family disagreement," Mr. Harrington explained. "But when he fell ill last year, he hired me to locate any surviving family. Unfortunately, by the time I traced your parents' deaths and your departure from Boston, you had already left for California." "How did you find me?" Beatrice asked, still trying to process this unexpected turn of events. "Pure chance," the attorney admitted. "I've been inquiring at every settlement between San Diego and Sacramento for months. When I mentioned your name in Pinecrest Valley, the storekeeper's wife immediately recognized it. She said you'd married a local rancher after some sort of dramatic rescue during last winter's blizzard." Henry and Beatrice exchanged a look, both thinking of Mrs. Peterson's fondness for retelling their story with increasingly romantic embellishments. "So what happens now?" Henry asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mr. Harrington placed the envelope on the table. "This contains all the legal documents transferring ownership of the properties and accounts to Mrs. Forrester. There are decisions to be made, of course, whether to sell the San Francisco house, how to manage the business interests, but those don't need immediate attention." After the attorney departed, promising to return in a few weeks for Beatrice's decisions, an awkward silence fell between husband and wife. William, oblivious to the tension, had fallen asleep in his cradle nearby. "Well," Henry finally said, staring out the window rather than meeting her eyes, "seems you're a wealthy woman now, Bea." "We're wealthy," she corrected gently. "What's mine is yours." He turned then, his expression troubled. "Is it because the law says different? Women's property reverts to their husbands upon marriage. But you didn't know about this inheritance when you married me. If you'd known—" "If I'd known, nothing would be different," Beatrice interrupted firmly, rising to stand before him. "Do you truly believe I would choose a townhouse in San Francisco over this life we've built? Over you and William? It would be a better life for you," Henry argued, though she could see the hope warring with doubt in his eyes. "Comfort, society, all the things you left behind in Boston." "Those things weren't enough then, and they're certainly not enough now," Beatrice replied, taking his work-roughened hands in hers. "I love you, Henry Forrester. I love our son, our ranch, our life together. Money doesn't change that." The tension slowly left Henry's shoulders as he searched her face and found only sincerity. "What do you want to do with it, then?" Beatrice smiled, an idea taking shape. "I was thinking we might expand the ranch, buy that adjacent property you've had your eye on. Maybe build that bigger house you talked about when we first met. You'd want to stay here, even with all those options now open to you." "This is home," Beatrice said simply, "though I wouldn't mind visiting San Francisco occasionally, taking William to see a bit of the world beyond Pinecrest Valley." Henry pulled her into his arms, relief evident in the way he held her. "I was afraid I might lose you," he admitted against her hair. "That you'd realize you could do better than a rough rancher with calloused hands and simple ways." Beatrice leaned back to look into his eyes. "Henry Forrester, you are the best man I have ever known. Money doesn't change that either." Their kiss was a reaffirmation, a promise that transcended circumstance or fortune. In the years that followed, the Forrester Ranch grew into one of the most prosperous in the region. The modest cabin gave way to a comfortable two-story house with enough room for their expanding family. William was joined by a sister, Rebecca, 2 years later, and then twin boys, James and Thomas, the following year. Beatrice used part of her inheritance to establish a small school in Pinecrest Valley, ensuring that all the local children, including her own, would have access to education, regardless of their family's circumstances. She occasionally taught there herself, particularly enjoying the literature and history lessons that reminded her of her own education in Boston. Henry proved to have a remarkable head for business once given the opportunity to expand beyond mere survival. Under his management, their cattle operation grew to include selective breeding that produced stock sought after throughout California. The shipping interests Beatrice had inherited flourished with his practical insights guiding investments. They did make those occasional trips to San Francisco, staying in the townhouse Beatrice had chosen to keep. Henry initially felt out of place in the bustling city, but over time, he developed a confidence in navigating urban society that matched his assurance on the ranch. "You've come a long way from that gruff cowboy who found me in the snow," Beatrice teased during one such visit, watching as he charmed a group of business associates at a dinner party. "And you've come a long way from that half-frozen Boston lady who looked at me like I might be planning to murder you in your sleep," he countered with a wink. It became a tradition to visit San Francisco each December, partly for business but primarily to celebrate what they referred to as their finding anniversary, the day Henry had discovered Beatrice in the blizzard and declared her his wife. "Was that really the first thing you said to me?" Beatrice asked on their 10th anniversary as they walked along the San Francisco waterfront. "That I was your wife now, not the very first," Henry admitted with a laugh. "First, I probably cursed a blue streak at finding what I thought was a corpse. Then I realized you were still breathing and—" He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "I think what I actually said was, 'Don't you die on me, whoever you are. I've finally found you and I'm not letting go.'" "That sounds more romantic than 'you're my wife now,'" Beatrice observed, squeezing his hand. "Well, I might have said that part when we got back to the cabin and you were still unconscious," Henry conceded. "More to myself than to you, like a promise, I suppose, that I'd take care of you, give you a place to belong." "You certainly kept that promise," Beatrice said softly. They had returned to the ranch for Christmas that year, as they always did, wanting their children to experience the holiday in the home that had witnessed so many meaningful moments in their lives. On Christmas Eve, after the children had finally fallen asleep in anticipation of the morning's festivities, Henry and Beatrice sat before the fire in the comfortable parlor of the house they had built together. "I have something for you," Henry said, reaching into his pocket. Wasn't sure whether to give it to you now or wait for tomorrow, but this seems right." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. Beatrice unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box, intricately carved with a scene of the mountains surrounding their ranch. "It's beautiful," she murmured, running her fingers over the detailed work. "Open it," Henry urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a gold locket. When Beatrice pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal a miniature painting on one side, a perfect likeness of their first cabin, snow-covered just as it had been the day they met. On the other side was an inscription: "Found in snow, forged in fire, forever in love." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as she looked up at her husband. "Henry, it's perfect. Had it made in San Francisco last year," he explained, helping her fasten it around her neck. "The artist thought I was crazy, wanting a picture of a cabin instead of a portrait, but I wanted you to have something to remember where we started." "As if I could ever forget," Beatrice replied, touching the locket where it rested against her heart. "That day changed everything." "For the better?" Henry asked, echoing a question she had asked him years before. "For the best," Beatrice confirmed, leaning forward to kiss him with all the love that had grown between them over their years together. "I used to believe in fate, you know, that everything happens for a reason. Then Theodore Wilson failed to appear and I thought fate had abandoned me." She smiled, meeting Henry's gaze. "Now I know better. Fate didn't abandon me that day, it led me exactly where I needed to be. Into a blizzard," Henry teased. "Into your arms," Beatrice corrected. "The rest is just details." Outside, snow began to fall softly, blanketing the ranch in a pristine white that reminded them both of beginnings and second chances. But inside, surrounded by the warmth of the home and family they had built together, the mail-order bride who had been left in the snow and the cowboy who had found her frozen knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their start, lead exactly where they are meant to.